You walk into a bank you've never used before and sign some routine paperwork. Nothing dramatic, just a new account. But before you've even finished signing, someone in a back office, someone you'll probably never meet, is already pulling up your file. Not because you did anything wrong, not because there's a problem. Because a system somewhere just registered a number next to your name. $100,000. And that number, quietly and instantly, moves you into a different category of customer than you were 5 minutes ago. Most people assume banking works the same way for everyone. You open an account, you deposit money, the bank holds it, maybe pays you a little interest. Simple. Equal. The same for the person with $500 as the person with $500,000. That assumption is wrong. And it's wrong in a very specific, very documented way. Today, we're going level by level through what actually changes in interest rates, in fees, in who answers your calls, the moment your combined balance crosses 6 figures. And by the end, you'll understand why banks don't just tolerate people with $100,000 saved. They actively compete to keep them. Let's start at the bottom, because the contrast is the whole point. Level 1. Under $20,000 combined. This is where most people in their 20s and 30s actually live. Some checking, a little savings, maybe a small emergency fund. At this level, you are, financially speaking, almost invisible to your bank. The numbers back this up directly. The national average savings account yield sits around 0.61% APY, and the broader FDIC-tracked average for ordinary savings accounts is even lower, closer to 0.38%. On $20,000, that works out to somewhere between $76 and $122 a year in interest, less than a single grocery run. You're not being mistreated here. You're simply not profitable enough yet for the bank to spend real effort competing for your money. The relationship is polite, automated, and largely indifferent. Level 2, $20,000 to $50,000. Something subtle starts to shift here. This is exactly where most preferred or relationship rewards programs at major banks begin to notice you exist. Bank of America, for instance, sets $20,000 in combined qualifying balances as the entry point for its gold tier, with $50,000 reaching platinum. You haven't necessarily changed your behavior. You've just crossed a threshold the bank decided on years ago, sitting in a spreadsheet, waiting for your balance to catch up to it. Fee waivers start appearing, maybe a slightly better savings rate. Nothing dramatic, but the bank's attention has shifted from ignore to monitor. Now here's the part this video is really about. Level 3, $100,000. This is not a soft, gradual upgrade. At most major banks, $100,000 in combined deposits and investments is a hard, deliberately engineered line, not a round number someone picked because it sounded nice in a brochure. At Bank of America, $100,000 is the exact balance required to enter the Preferred Honors tier, the same 6-figure mark that defines the Platinum Honors tier across several of the bank's other programs. Premium checking products at major institutions like HSBC use that identical threshold, at least $100,000 in combined deposits and investments, as the requirement for unlocking a dedicated wealth relationship manager, preferred loan rates, and a long list of fee waivers that used to require begging a branch manager. You might be thinking, okay, but is that actually meaningful? Or is it just a marketing tier with a nice name attached? Fair question. It is meaningful, and here's the proof. Once you're at that $100,000 plus tier, the printed APR on your credit card starts to matter less than what's happening underneath it. Your rewards bonus increases automatically, maybe SFIS, often by tens of percentage points compared to the entry tier, and fee waivers stop being something you request and start being something applied to your account by default. The mortgage math tells the same story. The documented fee discount for crossing into the higher balance tier is several times larger than the discount given at the entry level. Same bank, same products, completely different treatment, and the only variable that changed is the number sitting in your accounts. Let's actually look at why this number matters so much to the bank itself, because the explanation isn't sentimental, it's mathematical. If your $100,000 sits in an average traditional savings account, the bank pays you almost nothing for the privilege of holding it. At the national average rate, that's about $380 a year. Not a typo, $380 on 6 figures of your money. But the bank doesn't just let that money sit there doing nothing. It lends a version of it back out through mortgages, auto loans, credit lines, typically around 7% or higher. Run that math on the same $100,000, and the bank is generating somewhere close to $7,000 a year in potential revenue against the few $100s it pays you to keep the deposit. That gap between what you earn and what the bank earns on your money is called the net interest margin. And across the U.S. banking industry, the average net interest margin recently sat at roughly 3.39%, the highest level in years. Multiply that spread across millions of accounts, and you're looking at the actual engine of how a bank makes money. Your $100,000 isn't just a balance, it's raw material. It's worth pausing on that net interest margin number for a second, because it's not some obscure metric buried in an annual report nobody reads. It's the single most watched figure in the entire banking industry. Watched figure, the one analysts check every quarter to judge whether a bank is healthy. And the fact that it sits near multi-year highs right now means the gap between what you earn and what the bank earns has rarely been wider. That gap doesn't show up on your monthly statement. It shows up on theirs. If you're finding this kind of breakdown useful, the stuff that isn't in the brochure, go ahead and subscribe now, because we do this every week. Banks, credit cards, lenders, all broken down level by level, with real numbers instead of marketing language. Real wealth is invisible to the person who hasn't crossed the threshold yet. It only becomes visible to the institution holding it. There's another piece of math hiding underneath all of this, and it explains why $100,000 specifically, not $80,000, not $150,000, shows up so consistently across the industry. FDIC insurance covers deposits up to $250,000 per depositor, per bank, per ownership category. That's not a coincidence sitting next to the $100,000 tier. Banks have every incentive to build loyalty programs that keep your six-figure balance fully concentrated, fully insured, and fully theirs to lend against, comfortably under that ceiling, with plenty of room to grow before you'd ever need to think about splitting your money across institutions. The bank wants that balance to stay exactly where it is. The words are the mechanism that keeps it there. You might also be sitting here thinking, this is interesting, but I don't have a six-figure salary, so none of this really applies to me. It applies to you more than you'd expect. Maya, 34, lives in Austin and works a completely ordinary job, nothing close to a six-figure income. She built her $100,000 not through some windfall, but through 8 years of automatic transfers set up the day she got her first stable paycheck and a stubborn refusal to upgrade her lifestyle every time she got a raise. Her bank never asked how she got there. It didn't care whether the money came from a bonus, an inheritance, or 8 years of quiet discipline. It only cared that the number in the account crossed the line. That's the part worth sitting with. The threshold doesn't reward income. It rewards accumulation however it happened. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud, because it doesn't fit neatly into a bank's marketing material. The institution isn't rewarding your wealth out of any kind of goodwill. It's protecting future revenue it's afraid of losing. A dedicated banker, an automatic fee waiver, a better mortgage rate. Every single one of these perks costs the bank far less than what it's actually afraid of. You closing your accounts and moving that six-figure balance to a competitor down the street, or worse, to an online bank paying 10 times the interest rate for doing nothing but existing on a server. So here's the uncomfortable truth, sitting underneath this entire video. The bank was never grading your character. It was never quietly admiring your discipline or your responsible habits. It was grading your retention risk, the statistical likelihood that you'd leave, and how much it would cost them if you did. The perks don't appear because you became a better person. They appear because you became more expensive to lose. That single reframe changes how you should approach your own banking relationship. You're not a customer hoping to be noticed and rewarded for good behavior. Once you're near that $100,000 line, you are functionally a retention target, a line item someone in risk management is actively trying not to lose, which means you have more leverage than you probably think you do. Call your bank. Mention, calmly and without drama, that you're shopping around. Watch how quickly a fee that was described as non-negotiable 6 months ago suddenly becomes very negotiable indeed. And one more thing worth sitting with. This threshold effect doesn't just apply to fee waivers and rewards bonuses. It changes the entire trajectory of your money if you let that balance sit passively instead of putting it to work. Run the comparison honestly. $100,000 left in a typical savings account for 10 years, earning the national average rate, grows to roughly $103,900. The same $100,000, invested instead at a historical long-term average return closer to what the broader stock market has delivered over decades, would grow to somewhere around $259,000 over that same decade, a gap of roughly $155,000, not because of some risky bet, but because of where the money was simply allowed to sit. None of this is a guarantee. Markets can and do drop sometimes sharply, and past performance never promises future results. But it's worth knowing the size of the gap before deciding to leave six figures parked somewhere, earning less than 0.5%. There's a second version of this same lesson, and it shows up once you actually have that money invested instead of just sitting in savings. A 1% annual management fee sounds tiny on paper, almost not worth mentioning. But run it across 2 decades on a $100,000 portfolio, growing at a typical 8% annual rate, and that single percentage point quietly consumes around $79,000 of your final balance, roughly 17% of what you would have otherwise ended up with. The fee doesn't announce itself. It just compounds, silently, in the opposite direction from your money. Let's bring it all together. Under $20,000, you're mostly invisible to the bank. A small, low-priority account earning next to nothing. Between $20,000 and $50,000, the loyalty tiers start quietly watching, waiting for you to cross further in. At $100,000, the entire relationship flips. You stop being a minor cost on the bank's books and start being a relationship actively worth protecting, with real perks attached to prove it. And underneath every one of those perks is the same quiet math. The bank fears losing your six-figure deposit, far more than it values rewarding you for having it. If this kind of breakdown helped you see your own bank differently, subscribe for more of these. We go behind the curtain on banks, credit cards, and lenders, one level at a time, every single week. So tell me honestly in the comments, are you above or below that $100,000 line right now? And has your bank ever actually treated you differently?